Toboda, the Bala, some such delay. Very Tomatada, Lekamabo, Homameba, Garatri, Tonda Chibo, Johnson, the February, Garniche, the said February, so they got to get it. Then the Tonda Chimbo, Karina, Zabirin Gita, also Melun Boche, so this the Rapagina. They are sort of top, doing power top, that they corner, you can your married. Some power of one was all about the 1 year. They come to nearly Kasimana, and so they are sort of top, doing power top. The corner, was what that Rangi Tamchi, they are the top, doing power top, Karita, it's all the dog, that's all your age.
So first of all, hello to all my friends who came here this evening. And I know that many of you are very busy, you have many things to do, but because you consider this very meaningful, you came here, even if that means even if that entails hardship. So I would like to thank you very much for doing that, because our gathering is indeed very meaningful. Because in this world we have obtained a precious human body, and whether we follow the worldly system or the spiritual system, all that we do, that all people do, is try to find a way to be happy and try to find a way not to suffer. And that is really all we do and nothing else. We do it in many different ways, but in the end we really only look for happiness and we try to eliminate suffering. So we can consider our gathering here like a meeting where we try to find together a way to bring about happiness and to be free from suffering for others and oneself.
Tangani yung di kaya yung mariti na dumigin nyamyong mangboyore tilok ni gani semkang bate sa hako mari ida sa hako mari yung di mi ja ni nyamyong mangboyore ni ni to botam jel te kiga cheki ore.
And so I personally actually do not have a lot of learning or many good qualities, but I do have a lot of experience when it comes to difficulties or suffering. And of the two types of system, I have some understanding of the field of the concerns the mind. And this is really all I have some understanding of. Apart from that, I do not have much learning. But because I have much experience, and that is why my friends like to talk to me.
탑 때는 강에서 세발에 무슨 요는 때라 무조건 되와 요래 되게 감미를 뛰니들이 다다 서 무조건 받을 때는 몇가 통화 때는 따지 때는 통지 요봐 들이들은 아니 제일 시해지 요봐 통화 제일 수지 요봐 통화 두바 얼빠들 들라고 무슨 대족봐 무조건 통화다 주바다 저거 저거 타비라들 무조건 빠지 제일 뛰는 적인 감거든요 그런 좋아하면 시랍을 뛰는 적인 감는데 따로 뛰는 잡을인데 야제 로리라로 이제 되더니 로리 대답제 싸면 열 가려야 당소 대화 톱고 너네 강고고 이 탑들 뛰는 잡을인데 야제다 잡은 로리
And so there's much that we can talk about, but then there is one ultimate experience that, ultimate purpose that we have. So this is what I have learned from my own experiences in life. And so that is, whatever activity we do, we try to find a way to be happy, and we try to find a way to not experience difficulties or suffering. And so normal human beings, people, do this based on the external world. So that is the world that we can actually see, the things that we can see in the external world, then the things that we can hear, that conversation and so on, and the various objects that we can touch with our hands. So that is the outer world. And so on the basis of the human beings use their intelligence, their wisdom, to try to find happiness in this outer world of sight, of sound, and of touch. And on that level, in this regard, human beings really have been able to develop the world greatly. And however, there is only a single goal, a single intention behind that development, and that is because all people want to experience happiness and they want to avoid suffering.
nang chen ki ge se selu de tin da da chen ki ge tong ju chen ri la le ka chen ki de tong ki tun ki ren ki de ka wa do ce sem re sha ji这里这sem了大街上的这里sem做了吧的啊人就把这有嘞能sem做起大街上的有嘞这样的这里sem做了吧的啦这里门站不着大概说的记录的那大概有嘞说是sem康的吧的那大概有嘞多那这里能出大街上的这个这里他sem做了吧的생분에 땅을 딱지 땅에 들이디 로서 찌요래 이로 소소는 다디 생감을 벌다니 차담 다 저러면 다를 들이란 거지 대다로 장 지와를 가면 좀 소장 하장 중종이 이렇게 봐도 그냥 하고 말이지 그 마고는 들이 녹이 삼점 잡아 직진 감독들이 동의 요새 뭐 받쳐 하고 그래지 용요래지 용은 대라 탑대를 뛰니 용띠 중종을 탑대를 뛰는 소소들이 운일장이 깡기들이 약탑이요래지 대회를 다 소치들이 딱 끼었다면 다 생무소 봐 같이 보래지 이는다 또 다소 라왕 매번거리들이 강연을 채우라 그냥 semtor pa ta chi bori ja sam ko ta ti ta chi bori ja ti den lang ke la che chi da wo ji ti ti lam yo lo ti ti so so ke ti ta dong ne ta gang e che de se ta ba ti yin na de so ba che ta ba ta ti cha yo re ti
the outer world, where we try to find happiness in the outer world, in a world that we can see and hear and touch. Where actually is that felt? Where do we experience this outer world? The one who experiences the outer world actually is inside. Actually, it is the mind. Therefore, in the spiritual system, we turn inward and we investigate the mind. We look at the mind. So it is like the science of the mind, like a form of psychology, looking at the mind. And you can give it many different names. Each religion calls it a different name according to their own custom. But it is the science of the mind, looking at the mind, the essence of the mind, that experiences this outer world. And so I myself do not have much learning. I have not studied much about the various sciences, the sciences of the mind, and so on. But however, in this world I have experienced incredible suffering. There's probably nothing I have not seen or experienced. So I know about suffering in this world. And therefore, although I do not have much learning and many good qualities, I have found some methods to overcome suffering, difficulties. And so when I think about it, I found that actually the outer development, the outer world is important. However, even though we develop the outer world, still on the inner level, without any choice of freedom, we still experience difficulties. And that is why the mind also is very important, to understand the mind and the way we think, how the mind functions. And this is how I gained trust in those methods that I found related to the mind. So it is because of my own personal experiences of difficulties and also being able to overcome suffering that now I'm able to maybe share some words of advice or help with others.
sem tartar sem khamro ba tambu roa mesiba meta toro so usong so tonju je ge yode chapa meta toro de tiri da tamjela dewa do ba da do ge do ba te chama chi pa re dongye de gang ni jong de dewa de gang ni jong do dewa chi ba de gang ni dongye chi ba de gang ni tiri muji chi ba re muji che ne tin te gang na tiri tambu di so 메나 도로데 루디 잡도 루디 잡아도 가리지를 잡도 대 딱게 당고래 대 딱게 당내데 루디 가리를 정도 대신에 당고 루디 잡자지나 당고 지역에 바드에 봐야 타만 저 버지 대심을 되네 오 대하고는 들이들에 내와의 관리 송동에 관해서 대다 하고 요래 네 당고 주고 저 강의들 샘지바들의 샷 저 수당 통토고 요매 별로 밑에 겁나 가리에서는 잡으려 되네 또 살인 용왕아 요래서 살인 용왕아 되더니 속차 가리나지 디족들 이게 용왕아 참 요래서 오 대참요 마시네 대 고념 자냐 보이나 다 대화 연구 요래서 대 차만 하면 되리 되나들이 차만 잡리 둘러들이 차와나 강화라서 뭐 되나 또 동이 연구요래 또도 남을나 차와 치나 그 요면 차와 치고 동이 장난 그 요면 차장냐 보는 다 내가 더 요리 생용왕나 대달을 난 샘들을 누가 찾아도 공간이나 생용왕아 요리 루전 용왕아 나는 네버 루존피 샘들아 유몽아디 대통령이지. 이 속자서동 소이나 이거 또다 마땅도 로도 통주지 줘봐야지. 제일 핀바거든 진과 저렇게 진과 탐지는다 좀 매바다 되라서 봐. 좀 매바 동네 요가 되라서 거기 초고 요래서. 손을 뒤에 탐지라 동네 요리 좀 매를 동네 가리고 뭐도. 대답을 때는 들이다다 동네 요저 강을 내도 이제 따뜻해요. 누구는 저 샘을 샘들이 유무방아들지 대유무방아들 강속체라들이 대속체들이 대중고 따다는 중고 차장 국만요 받아가 들이 차는 들이 누구에 답지 되는 중고요래 들이 난 민들 루드는 조왕아 샘들은 유몽아오나 그 생조아치 뭔가들 저아치 뭐요 요리 탐지를 뛰는 사랑이랑 대화체 못 찾아. 들이 대라 뛰는 난 게임 속자 탐지 샘게 유모방아데 루진 중앙아 세비 유모방아 코만자 들이 생중앙아 총부요래 들이 때도 잡을 촉바탐 담보 난 샘촉 들이 달고 니발 루촉 들이서 말아 들이 촉바 연구를 내가 담지 들이 방구 촉고지 샘을 톡야서 대자와도 하고를 들이 뭐 답답하고도 상모당에 들이 생각을 봐지 들이 차요래
And so how we can understand the mind is by first looking at the beings that we can see. For example, there is the human beings and the animals. These are beings that we can see. We can touch them, we can see them, they're objects. And so when we observe humans and the animals, for example, their wish to be happy and their wish not to suffer is exactly the same. And so then it is important first to understand how these beings actually appear, where do they come from. So first, there is the body of a human or an animal that is created. Why do they appear in this way? Why do they have such a body? So there is a cause that leads to the birth of such a body, and then after having taken birth, in the middle, then when this body stays in a certain place, and in the end, there's various conditions that lead to the destruction of that body. So first, it is important to understand that what is the cause of our experiences in this life? What causes our experience of happiness and what causes suffering? So the causes come from within the mind, and the mind is something that nobody can see. So therefore we first try to understand the being, like the body of a being, for example a human being. The body of a human being consists of the 5 elements, and actually the body of all life forms, of all the creatures, consists of the 5 elements. So then when those 5 elements are in balance, that being experiences happiness, and when they're out of balance, then they experience suffering. For example, in this world we can see there's a much suffering related to excessive heat or cold and so on. We need heat and cold, but then in this world it gets too hot, it gets out of balance, or it gets too cold, and then we need more heat and so on. And so that is when the outer elements, when the 5 elements have become disturbed. And so then first we understand the outer level, the things that we can see. For example, the body of a human and an animal, the world, consisting of the 5 elements. And so that is something that scientists also can see, scientists as well as religious practitioners. And so then also, based on understanding that, we can finally also begin to understand the suffering of those beings without a form, without a body, because the disturbance of the 5 elements originates within the mind. And that is what then causes the disturbance of the 5 elements, even if it is caused by beings without a body. So it comes from the 5 afflictions in the mind, and depending on which of the 5 afflictions is the strongest, we experience various types of imbalance, heat and cold and so on. So this is really where all suffering comes from. The 5 outer elements that make up our body are very strongly related to the 5 afflictions in our mind, and these are very strong related to the 5 elements on the outer level and the outer world. So the inner and the outer in brief are strongly related to each other. The mind of any being that possesses the 5 afflictions is that these 5 afflictions directly affect the 5 elements that make up their body, and that affects the outer world. So again, it begins first of all with the mind. First the mind becomes disturbed. Then that disturbance of the mind disturbs the body, so that brings the body in an imbalanced state. And an imbalanced element of the body then leads to an imbalanced speech, so we act out. And then that leads to a lot of fighting and suffering in this world, and more conflict. So it is necessary to recognize that it all originates from an imbalance, a disturbance of the mind within. And so then understanding that, the science of the mind has emerged from understanding that, and then trying to find a method to purify this imbalance of the mind.
There go the make come here. Walk the long come, you want to talk tango, you didn't send Namka, there's such a taket on the Namka, the taket on the Roy, you do much about it. 这里今天大家去了话，他这个大现在大街大了，他们也生活内容的还搞不懂的。这里今天你大去了做做的，现在大街当个有的，那我做他们这个他女人用啊，我是这把戏；女人用啊，我是生用啊，我的男生个女模嘛，我的另外有把戏，这去的，这茶嘛用，这拿茶用不用的，这生用啊中了，这茶当中的。著名的这个药嘛的，呀，周签了这个药嘛的，在家里呢写进了这个嘛，茶写进了这个药嘛，茶写进了这个药嘛的，别写了进了，这里不是，这里怎么名这大概你就把茶当家里抽了，这要不他，这里没别老是把这个药的，这写了这家里写了这当他这嘛他把的，这他这嘛他别家里呢这里到阳江的云人玻璃大街道，到广州了，云人玻璃街道，有的从在广州了，这就进了这里，大太阳说，用啊茶嘛用吧，这里说了怎么样，另外的东西茶嘛用吧，这你成绩老板拿错，这里拿不到钱，这老板去来去，这里去了可以结巴不来去。学长你们都说些什么这个结巴不？什么个那当子马戏呢？你什么这个家族嘛有钱了？这里这就把这忙过来这家人来说，这说东西这有有啊？这里我这生活苦要买了，旅苦用不了，家里个他不生的苦用不了，生的喜欢的地方，早晚家里土地那边了。大我说咱们那个去了把他们这个上街去，到那没这个这里，咱们那个就那往下游那样。生点平均上这个没了，这地方有嘛那边了，老多东西都可以叫来的，这边了这里，然后他把这对了，大忙不怕嘛，就是我说上这是早起我来家，那先个这平地的早啊这里，上这是来家的，除了把他们这个些了这里，然后。那个当他做的，没的他没这个，你那女的是多了都不一般家里边，男生的一般家根本都不能，那个光是看了了，记得呢，等人多多，等人夸的，写的，出个这些的要的，这边呢，我说他高中高的了，这里当我，上帝是咋起步的一下子，去了有哪着，没哪着，这里，去起把的爬样的，这里看着一下子，去起把的救过的，然后先个年路救过来的，救了家里救过的，茶厂都用不过来，茶人嘛就长人嘛就别了，你我出去我忘了嘛，当我现在苦呢，我就这样子，当年去不是什的，这看起不来下子，你那个瓜茶吧，这两个瓜茶吧嘞，那到这到了就到这里不是那样的，这竟然没那样的，这两个刚起去的，不把他们来消掉了。
So the cause of all imbalance comes from within the mind, and that is mainly the ego, the selfish mind. And so when we try to understand the mind, how can we really understand the mind? Because the mind is actually not an object that we can see or hear and touch and so on. That is why often we give the example that the mind is like space. So within the body we have the 5 elements, and so the flesh and the bones and so on make up the earth element. The blood and the liquids are the water elements. The body heat is the fire element. The breath, the wind element, and the mind is the space element. So we can understand the imbalance of the elements by looking at the space element that makes up our body, which is our mind. But then if you try to understand space is not an object of the intellect. We cannot investigate it with the intellect. So that is what the spiritual paths, the religions are doing. We are trying to understand the nature of this mind, which is like space. And so first we understand that this body consists of the 5 elements. And then we recognize that within the mind we have the 5 afflictions, And then we recognize that the 5 afflictions, the mind and the body, the 5 elements, are related to each other. And if there is an imbalance of afflictions, if the mind is disturbed, then that creates illness and so on. And also that disturbs the outer elements and leads to heat and cold and so on. So heat and cold are things that we need, but not in excess. If there's too much heat, then we suffer. But also if we try to make it cooler, and if it gets too cold, again we suffer. So there needs to be a balance between heat and cold. And so likewise, there needs to be a balance of within the mind, a peaceful mind. And so then when the elements are disturbed, then the body gets sick. Then we try to cure this with medical treatment. But then no matter how much we try to cure it, we cannot really resolve it if we do not resolve the imbalance within our mind. And that is because we have habituated to this imbalance for a very long time, that we cannot simply resolve that through some medical treatment. So the mind has grown used to being disturbed by the afflictions for a very long time. And that is why now our elements are out of balance. So there is an imbalance of happiness and suffering. There's too much suffering. And so in the Buddhist view, we call that the workings of karma, cause and effect. In another religion like Christianity, you call the same principle the creator God, for example. But it comes down to the mind, not recognizing how the mind functions. That leads to all sorts of imbalances, and that leads to all sorts of suffering also on the outer level. And if we become disturbed on the inner level, then in the future we cannot avoid more suffering. So it is necessary to find the balance of the mind, and that means to develop peace and happiness, a peaceful and happy state of mind. And the root of that, even scientists have acknowledged, is to cultivate love. This is what brings the mind to a state of peace and happiness. So even if a person would have all the money and all the riches in the world, if they have no love, they will never really experience peace and happiness. Then actually their wealth becomes a cause of more suffering. So love is really most important, and this is what, for example, in Buddhism we have recognized. That is the cause of all happiness, of all peace. And this is what actually all religions do share in common. That is what leads to the happiness temporarily and ultimately. And so now a human being has a human body, but this human body is just like a pair of clothing, like a dress that we will change one day. But the mind will never be exchanged. And so therefore whatever we have grown used to, whatever we have habituated the mind to, and this is where the mind will continue to go. So this is what we call cyclic existence, according to the Buddhist view. So therefore wherever I go, whatever I do, I always stress the importance of love. That is most important, whether one is a religious person or not. So what we call the Dharma or the religion, what is that really? The Dharma really means to change one's mind, to transform one's mind, which means to bring some balance back to the mind, just like a balance between heat and cold. So it's not too hot and not too cold. And so that the mind is in a state of peace and happiness and not afflicted, not controlled by afflictions. So that is what we call in Buddhism a state of equanimity. The state of equanimity is this balanced mind of peace and happiness. So this is how I have personally understood that. And so although, again, I do not know much about the various sciences and so on, this is what I would like to share with my friends to the best of my abilities.
tunji yun don sula te sa yeki gore te la man tunbi jin da ma da jun de yang yun tong tong ma de ne yo ma te ta chi ya ta chi lu pa ge shi la le chi ba de ni chi la men ri ma do rang zong ge tunji te la ti rang zong tunji ye shang ne lo te la ti ne ti tunji ne ba che ya te la ti ni ne yo ren tong 네버 첼라들이 소소세를 밀리 강가다 네와다 동의들어서 뭐 좋아 좀 담게 라는 그 자기지 다다다 신용왕하고 리더는 낭지 뭔가 지체를 했더니 매도 상우다 장데 매도 상우데 매도데 시성아 변 매도데 시성 상우데 내기 요래 매도 적시성 매도데 상우데 요래 매도데 상우들이 양짤지 매도 가면 매도 제라에 맞겠다 그러더니 매도 가도 용고요. 저렇게 난 생근 되지 랑 가르쳐 놨다도 라마 톱 세물 라마 톱나 그래서 이제 되지 돼서 람 이것들이 대화 근처지 좀나 라마를 샤데 동네 되지 좀나 라마 마저 거지 거리더니 라마를 샤 오, 접사성의 마시더니 랑 놓아 좀 랑 사운드라 디지 가는 소소 데이터들이 대화다 동행이 믿어버려. 그런데 이제 뭐지한테 누가가 임바데 우리 누가가 저기 바데나 우리 대요들이랑 난 누가가 주도 당해 이유를 담아 찍을 찍을 담아더니 너희 마음에 좀 빠져들이 담아 미지 시에도 조금 더 터져요래. 뒤에 오 대담제들 당마다 니마니 요와자 하고는 오 요와 당이 요와 가라 당마다 니마니 요리지 때로 생 코로나 당마다 니마니 요 생코로나 당마가리 시라를 니마티 니모 말에 ቻ트 시라를 띠네 니모 뭐지 실내 중다 용지 가까이 실내 오 상태를 용하고 사와 탐지 되버려 ቻ트 저런이 차도 몽송거 변하지 세상다 차도라서 뭐가 레테 탐지 등이 이제 딜서 거려 매도 상호대 딜서 용고 하고신 이 시합라들 왕도 시합라들 반응 생각 많아 왔지라 그 생각을 왕토면 들이 문이 대화도 동을 나와 돕고 말이 생각을 왕도 좀 마시라 다다 잡을 그땅 속에 대화 좀 돌아야 다 동이 치는 쪽으로 단다 따라서 서여지 내가 야게 송어야 이랑다다 생중화 공만요 봐 낭생기 세주 공만요 봐 그래서 동네 연구를 제가 잡지가 싸먹었다니 당고랑 소속했더니 라랑 소속 생각을 톱 톱랬더니 니신도 땅나 때에 소소랑 그 대화서 라왕기 도야 요래 대라티네 대대화 좀나 대서 싸먹다다게 능이 대화를 쫓아가다 제 라왕때 마탑라 대화 탑지 능이 좀 요래 대 소시 남용 때래 소소 능이 받으면 봐 용라양 생군 니신의 땅 이렇게 주었다는 때래 오 동해에서 채도세서 봐. 내가 그 제가 초트 받으리 병원이 전에 피부 정서 때는 세여제 대화 좀 좋지구나. 방에서 대화도 대화 탑요 말이 라왕 매보고는 강에다 따로 연구요래. 제가 안창을 로근도 싫었는데 당나지지 랑게 동해 대화를 제가 탑 대답하신다. 대답들이 들이 나와 체벌들이 자데. 소소랑 게 되었다. 강에 체도세 방한테 로봇탑지가 되다. 능력이 받쳤다요 말이. 소포는 우도를 원보면 매도를 가리나 들이 능이 저리 도탈들이 대화 총총 능이 막 저놈들이 내가 충충마다 용토고요 말이 글쎄 여제 대화 됐다면서 얘기하더니 난 생각 대화한테 저는 대사를 라를 주고요 라망도 뭐 너나 로마 라망 톱을 피소요 말하고 생각 라망 톱을 들이 때도 피보요
So that is the cause, and then of this body, of this life, and then there is a time that we spend in this world. We live in this world. So now in this world, what we can see are the human beings and the animals. And our lifespan in this world is uncertain. If various favorable causes come together, then we will live for a longer time. And if unfavorable conditions come together, then we will only stay here for a short time. So in the Dharma we call that the workings of karma, cause and effect. But that is just another name that we give the way things actually really function, how things naturally arise due to various causes and conditions. So these favorable conditions that lead to a long life, for instance, come from within the mind, and also the unfavorable conditions come from within the mind. And so depending on that, depending on what is stored in our mind for this lifetime, we experience all sorts of a great variety of happiness and suffering, and everyone to differing degrees. So depending on the various conditions that are present within one's individual mind. So one's experience in this life of happiness and suffering is the working of the interplay between the outer 5 elements of your own body and the inner 5 afflictions of the mind. And these afflictions are like the seed of a flower. So the flower is like this body, and when this body dies, it's like when the flower withers, then the seed still remains, and the seed will again grow into a flower in the future. So whatever is stored in that seed, whatever color of flower and so on, will grow in a similar way again in the future, even if that flower, the body, has died. So therefore it is essential to find the favorable conditions or causes of happiness within the mind, to attain freedom of the mind, not just the freedom of the outer level of the body. In this lifetime I have experienced much difficulties, and therefore I'm speaking from experiences. So once we have created the various causes of suffering and we experience suffering, we have those seeds that are stored within the mind, and that will lead to both happiness and suffering for as long as we are alive. And then third, so that's the second point, as long as the body lives in this world. And then third is then various causes or conditions that lead to the destruction of this body. And so the body remains for however long it has the karma to remain, and then in the end one element dissolves into the other element and the body dies. So regarding the outer 5 elements and also the inner 5 afflictions, they all have a subtle aspect, like an essential aspect, and they have like an impure, we can say a pure and an impure aspect. And when all of these dissolve, it is like a candle being extinguished and the person dies. So we all have these two parts. There's a pure part of the element and the impure part of the element. And there's a pure part of the mind and an impure part of the mind. The pure part, or the pure aspect of the mind, is the wisdom aspect of the mind, and the impure aspect of the mind is one's own afflictions. And so with the wisdom mind, what the wisdom mind does is it discerns between faults and qualities. It identifies the workings of the afflictions in the mind when they arise. It recognizes that the cause of happiness is love, and it recognizes that the cause of suffering are attachment, aversion, especially hatred and jealousy. And these afflictions are like the seeds of a flower within the mind. So the wisdom aspect of the mind knows clearly what to do and what not to do, what is right and what is wrong. And knowing that, you attain a true freedom, the freedom of the mind. And that is most important, because in this world, all that we really want is to be happy, and nevertheless, we create more and more suffering. So we can see that even though the outer fields of science that are developing, it creates an ever greater imbalance of the mind in beings, and that leads to more and more suffering. So although we want to be happy, we create much more suffering through the things that we do. So it is therefore most important not to find this freedom on the outer level, but on the inner level of the mind, to find happiness within the mind. And so finding happiness within the mind is a different way of viewing things, a way of thinking. And depending on the way we think about things, we can transform suffering into great happiness. That is a skillful means. A mind that lacks any freedom, a controlled mind by afflictions, that mind actually, through that way of thinking, we transform all happiness into suffering. So that is my personal experience, because I have experienced incredible suffering in this life, and I found that it is really a way of viewing things, how we view this world. And if we view the world in a certain way, there is a method to find happiness, even in suffering and difficult circumstance. And that is because the suffering circumstance is not determined by the outer world. The outer circumstance does not determine our happiness. So on the outer level, it is more difficult to find whatever we want, to find the freedom to have whatever we want. It is easier on the inner level, because it is only a way of thinking. Depending on our way of viewing things, we can transform an outer difficulty into great happiness. So that is a very special instruction. And through this instruction, I personally was able to tolerate much difficulty, and also help my friends overcome their difficulties, because in the end everyone suffers. There's nobody who doesn't suffer. Even the people who are very rich, they suffer, and also people who are poor, they suffer from the lack of possessions and so on. And so for the most part, we experience much suffering and only some slight happiness. And due to that, we cannot really appreciate the happiness that we do experience. And that is only the happiness, the pleasure that we seek on the outer level. So that is more difficult to create, because there's too much suffering on the outer level. So it is much easier to actually change our way of thinking and find peace and happiness within the mind. So we can see on the outer level, a country might experience freedom or independence, but it doesn't always help the people if they have not found the freedom within the mind.
레일 제와 체라부터 삼티지 다 그렇게 탐지기는 야방이 송송 요리 제당 요리 대그랑 기동이 변 속차 등록지나 제가 세당기 차도지는 등이 가리도 대당이 유라 pero tocar la sopa socha den tono la sa se go gore ko to me bar ton gore kari se me bar ton gore ko ti ni ne ba tan gore tong le de ba da gore to ma sa de ko to la jare to ti yuni se dan gore ti yin che wa se gore o ti jo de kari de se dan gore de se so ju la yu la kari se dan kari do 오 시랑 처음부터 시랑 중원의 시랑 이 중원의 하고 특별히 제일 다 생각이 다라 이 이제 생용왕아 낭주볼 용몽아 생용왕아 녹봉 용왕아 때들이 생용적이 나주 생기 잡을 그 사강도 몇이나 차디 요래 생기 같이 장망나요 들이 되는 낭 유몽디 딱 그만이라 들이세 너네 나와나도 되는 거 같이래 소들이 되는 것도 다 조금 시할까리 대답이 내 처치네 네 쪽까지 상태에 문제나 들이서로 좋아하나 오 나지 차원만이 장모만이 잡아자 우리 잡아자 들이지나 들이서 좀 보여래 그 답지 내가 답지 매도 라서 왔다면 매용을 요래 가리나 누가 찾아만 오더니 농에다 따면 좀 요래 때 매촉해서 단종을 이제 강제 책도 요래 다당성 통다 통제발이 로막하지 가리깡이도 그다음에 저낭 유목과는 좀 세당이 되다 보더니 서주고 마트를 낭 세고 내가 책도 요래 책도 따지더니 녹타를 하시자 요래 그래서 좋은데 가면 세당이 너는 sem도시 봐도 난 세고 네비 역할을 누기 역할을 오 세당이 차도를 네비 역할을 삼지리 이 삼지리 딱 보자 이는 근데 주로 답지를 때는 산쪽 sem도를 못지 저도 주시 봐도 삼지리 주지가 삼세주고 그래서 그걸 가이게 주고 그래 오 다기디 어디 총총지 진핑 어디 철도고 그래서 대잘 가르치게 되는 삼대 체도 그래서 들들을 셈니가 셈대와들을 대와 토고 요리 대대답에 송절지를 이제 그 우쪽으로 가다 sem좀도 봐야 송절지나 대시라고 되는들이 맞대 대대와 용토고 요리스
So then, what is our method to achieve such independence of the mind then? What is the root of such independence of freedom of the mind? First, the actual root is to, first of all, possess some wisdom and some intelligence that recognizes what are the causes of happiness and what are the causes of suffering. So this wisdom mind recognizes then that the only cause of happiness is love and the cause of suffering are the afflictions. And so then the various religions then try to find ways in which we can create love and try to explain why this is so beneficial. So according to the religious path, the Dharma, we say that even in this life, if a person cultivates love, then in future lifetimes that will be the cause of all happiness. It is like the seed of all happiness in future lifetimes. And in this lifetime, it creates all happiness, because that is just the nature of love. When you look at the mind of love, it just naturally is a happy state. For example, think of a person that has a great love for others. How is that person? Or how do you feel yourself when you really feel loving in your heart? So it is necessary that we recognize the qualities of love. And then next, that we recognize what are the causes of suffering. Suffering arises due to the afflictions, especially of hatred and jealousy. So we should recognize the faults in that. And that is what creates all illness, all suffering. For example, when hatred is the strongest affliction, it leads to a lot of physical illness, and also it leads to fighting in the outer level. For example, you can see in this world there's a lot of wars and a lot of fighting, and that is created by the mind of hatred. So for example, on a smaller level, there's two friends who love each other, who get along really well. There's great love in the beginning, but then one person gets jealous. And when you get jealous, then you lose that love, and then that jealousy leads to resentment and then to hatred. And that is really your true enemy. Your true enemy is your inner hatred, because this is what cuts your bond of love to the other person. So first there is love, and then there's jealousy, and then there's resentment and hatred, and that destroys the love in your heart. And then even if you're very rich, it is of no benefit, because you will still experience no happiness. It has the nature of suffering just naturally. So for example, if parents do not love their children, then children feel that naturally, and they will then disrespect their parents and so on. It is just the natural working of hatred, a lack of love. And so hatred ultimately is also what then creates the hell realm. And the hell realm is something that we actually experience, because it is the nature of hatred. For example, we can see its functioning when we look into the animal realm. We can see a poisonous snake, for example. That is like an embodiment of hatred and jealousy. So look at their suffering, the suffering of a poisonous snake. The moment you see a snake, immediately you want to get away from it, or you want to kill it, because it harms others, it hurts others. So immediately you have a resentment when you see that snake. It is because the snake has its quality of harming others, of being violent to others, of hurting others. And then the cause of that, the cause of the natural tendency to hurt others, comes ultimately from this mind of resentment and hatred. And so then recognizing that in the snake, for example, then you should recognize that same affliction in your own mind. I also have this affliction of resentment and hatred. So then you find the fault of that in your own mind by looking at your own mind. And so again, we need to understand that our inner mind, the five afflictions, are related to the five elements that make up our body, and these again are in turn related to the five elements on the outer level. So actually we can say that this entire universe, this planet, this world is just like one single person. And so it is essential to find freedom of the mind, and freedom of the mind can only be found if we eliminate the afflictions. And so it is most important to recognize that. And so, for example, then recognizing that, we recognize that when there is a balance of the mind, then just naturally that affects the outer elements. It leads to warmth where there is no warmth, and cold where there is too much heat. It leads to rainfall where there is no rain, and so on. It causes fruits and flowers to grow where they do not grow, and so on. But right now we can see in this world that this is not happening. There is much imbalance in this world, and that is because there is imbalance of the mind. For example, there is an increase of heat in this world, so the fire element is stronger. We can see when the fire element becomes too strong, everything will be burned away. So we can see in this world the difficulties that many places are already experiencing. And so that originates from the inner affliction of hatred, of anger. And even if our outer bodies do not yet burn, the affliction is already burning the happiness of our inner mind. And often this strong resentment and anger leads people even to commit suicide. So the fault only lies within the mind, the affliction within the mind. So we need to investigate our own mind, look at our own mind, and recognize the faults of our own afflictions, of hatred and jealousy. and recognize the qualities of love and compassion. And so that is what really all religions try to cultivate. It is this precious bodhicitta. We try to cherish or sustain and develop a mind of love. And that is the purpose of Dharma. It is to transform the mind so it becomes a loving mind. And we do that by decreasing our selfishness. We decrease our selfishness by cultivating a concern for others, an altruistic mind. And if we begin to think more about others, then naturally our love will increase. And if the love in the mind increases, then it will naturally affect the body and the mind. When the mind is happy, then naturally the body will be in balance and the body will be well. So I think it is necessary that both systems, the worldly system and also the system of the mind, the science of the mind, go together in a union. And in this way we have a method to find and experience happiness in this lifetime.
다 공부 받는 게 소소한 게 용기 가면은 동해만 보면 그냥 용쇼고 그래. 그냥 용쇼를 그냥 문제도 초과자 먹가면 나다 총지 차바는 게 밥이 오래서 대가비 가르쳐 있어요. 저 세상 내사 말이 기왕하면 되다 팔에서 다 들려서 민기 요리 파들랭이 돼서 내 장도 요리 물론 소도 요리 남그레 세상에 좀 쳐봐다 들이세다 동에서 다니지도 봐 이래 장도 오래서 대다 하고 대기서 야 강의를 가라가 강의를 란지 탐지를 가라메 받더니 민망 못더니 가라메를 쉬어요 야 나한테 생각을 해 대들 많이 발라마 때라서 못하죠 다 가르치고 그래 다 딜레 상그 요리 이런 어디까지 당신을 바카라게 이런 거랑 가라 이렇게 타마다 랑들이 생속 참아서 다다다디 가라 중통도 때나 고소도 집어 가가 요리 다들이 랑 가라 이나 파테 토도 대이제다 나니 그래 나사다 싫어지 요리 싫은 거 루틴들이 싫어 루틴들이 싫어다 레상도 요리 싫어지 그렇게 사바도 니지 제마지 기어 서마게 안 요리 대다로 상모다면 강도 형들이 동네에 탑들라 니들 레자고 요리서 누리가 거리시 바가들이 마오자게 니니는 레자고 요리서 가봐요 들었더니 동네 다닌 거 줘봐잖아 누구의 그 별로 핑크가 하고서는 별로 다다야 보도 요래 나타 독자오는 샤키체요 샤키체리 샤키 동네라 근데 그 핑크 우선들 동네 색감에 봐도 요래 다다 동네면 직장 요 말이 동네 용지 동네 우리 핑크 찾아하고서는 레니드 살아 레니라고 다다라고 줄이고 유모가 되라 요래 강나나 나타동동동 세상을 내 야, 뭐 봉지공 담제 생을 내 야, 대라 소바더니 대라가 밤에 봤대 나도 해나만 나도 담제 티 먹을래 누구 맛이 배래서 대라는 게 나그라 요 중지 우지 잡아 강의를 중지 봐 누구지 봐대 신학가리를 랑 생각을 저지 하고 그래 그래서 소출로 봤다도 저대 니와 당대 다다 니와 가리도 뒤져 가리도 저는 가라야 보도 들은 어디 니와 저가리 니 파진 너를 좀 봤다 거 뒤져 그래 양이 좀 봤다 오고도 야 저기들 도저히 니 같이 보더라 대양 좀 되버려 나 머리 도마디 맞다 들어오니까 좀 말이지 맞다 들어오니까 좀 나 머리 코트를 가리 내 저쪽에 기와리 이렇게 피무지 싸운 것도 아무것도 누가 상태를 내더니 그런 돌이 용띠 상이 저기 하고는 됐다 능이 저기 방시 봐 들이 내버져 접시 봐 돼서 좀시 준비시 봐라티 들이라게 또 다리 줘봐 제첩성시 나가 동황을 들을 야고 차성 능이 망고 용서 다다다 되와 초크요리 능이 되와 초크요리 대답할 때는 소소 용띠 직장 이 정말도 막히려 능이 되는 갑자기 하정 피보도 대답을 얘네야 다다다고 탐지게 대답을 가기 세 토발했더니 몇 동째나 생물도 시대가래 주로 유롱 매롱 뒤진데 땅에 다들 동의도 그게 고쳐고 그러지. 동의도 썩어 주송라고 유모배 주송세. 그때는 따라 유기 유모바 좀 문제다 봐. 그는 네버지 삼때서 되게 맥주제다 봐. 때다보다 차라 이렇게 삼때는 맥주 치를 주고 요래. 나디는 유모바도 자를 통을. 그러고 생부들 자다 도저 생비는 요래. 습도 어디 생도 절대나. 등에들이 차디 요래. 들었다다 라기 동의 통치 대화를 절래. 다 대토고 요래. 오.
As I mentioned before, I do not have many great qualities, much learning, but I have much experience when it comes to suffering and difficulties. For example, in the past, I was in war, fighting in a war, and during that time I was being bombarded with many weapons, a shower, a rain of weapons. And at that time I contemplated, now why is this happening? What is the cause of this? And I recognized the workings of karma, that this is the result of the action that I have done in a previous life that came from a mind of hatred, of anger. And now it is ripening in this way. So by experiencing it, I'm purifying this karma, I am repaying my karmic debt. So it helped me to tolerate the outer difficulty, and it also helped me to recognize the fault of my own afflictions, of hatred and anger and so on. I recognize that this is my own karma. I have created that with my own afflictions. So in this way it has really benefited me. Then, moreover, during that time, many people were dying from starvation. Nobody had anything to eat. And at that time, I contemplated that this is the result of greed or stinginess. It comes from actions, from karmas of stealing the wealth of others. So by experiencing starvation now, or famine, we are purifying this negative karma. So actually, it is a good thing. And actually, knowing that it is my own karma inspired me to share the little food I did have, because I did not lose my inner strength understanding karma. So I was able to give the little food I had and bring great happiness to others in doing that. Another time in prison, I got very sick and I was on the verge of death. And at that time I thought, now it is my time to leave this world. But even if I'm dying now, I am purifying so much negative karma. I will be fine for as long as I do not lose my love and compassion, because this is what I will bring with me into my future life. So instead of suffering at that time, actually I felt quite happy, and I thought that I'm purifying my negative karma, and it deepened my trust in karma even more. And so I found that by experiencing suffering, I really was able to also recognize what actually is happiness. So suffering really has helped me a lot. For example, it is just like when you have to do a surgery, the surgery itself is painful, so it creates suffering, but you still do it because you know it helps you. So because you know it helps you, already you do not suffer so much. Half the suffering is gone. And so likewise, if I know that this experience of suffering purifies my negative karma, it's good for me, then half the suffering is gone. And so everyone can relate to that, because there's no one who doesn't suffer. So we can all understand that suffering can be a very beneficial experience. So it is necessary in these times to recognize that this is my karma. I have created that myself with my own afflictions in the past, in my own mind. And so these various afflictions, like hatred and so on, now lead to the suffering of sickness and so on. Then the karma of the greed and the stinginess in my mind, this is what has led to me being poor, impoverished and so on. And then my mind, my lack of mindfulness, my unawareness, that is the result of karma, my karma of ignorance, not understanding the workings of karma. So it is necessary to recognize the faults within one's own mind in trying to understand karma. We need to understand that the causes of all suffering lie within our own mind. So in the Dharma, in the religion, for example, we try to find the causes of happiness and of suffering. So what is the cause of happiness? For example, on a small scale, you have received some good food, you eat some good food today. So that is happiness. What is the cause of that? If you receive something, then that is the result of having practiced generosity. So you know that, and then you are inspired to practice even more generosity. Or you look at a human being and an animal. Our mind is the same, but why do we look so different? It is because of an actions of karma, of ethical discipline. As a result of that, I have found a precious human body. So all of these qualities of the higher realms, the happiness of humans and so on, comes from actions that we have done with body and speech, and that come from a mind of love. So knowing all that, knowing karma, you know how to avoid more suffering and how to create your own happiness. And also understanding karma, you will be able to tolerate your own difficulties. And so this is what I have learned during my time in prison. I have experienced much suffering there, but because of this suffering, I was also able to recognize happiness. It is, if we do not experience any suffering, we cannot actually recognize happiness in the first place. So the experience of suffering is actually a very good thing, and it can really help us overcome the suffering within the mind. And so we need to understand that in order to really clear away our experience of difficulty and suffering, we need to change our way of perceiving things, our way of thinking or seeing things. And that is important whether we follow a certain religion or not, because we all experience suffering. And when we experience suffering, then this understanding will actually become useful. So when suffering arises, it is necessary to recognize that I have created that myself with my own afflicted mind. So it is necessary to recognize the affliction within oneself. And if you know that, you will also be more able to make an effort to turn that around and develop instead a mind of love and compassion. So if love increases, you will recognize more and more that the afflictions and the selfish mind are the true enemy, that are only within your own mind. So understanding this way of viewing things, you will be able to transform any suffering circumstance into happiness.
대외 랑주부터 많이 봐. 우리 제발 친구요래. 대중하는나 미국 입자사요래. 이거는 지들이 출국에서 줘봤다면 인념되요래. 가지 회담만 봐. 좋다면 인념되요래. 就说一嘛，你工作被出国家拉起家，他这里刚给忙不远，一两对出了国就说的，工作看了他把他就说一嘛的这里让你嘛你没别给没给，这我嘴巴他就用了，这都看的意思，就是那啥子中康的意思，就是啥子我老板的意思。 저도 저리 주고 제고 저도 이봐 하고 말이지 저도 개목에 저리 갑도 가리지 저리 개털지 문이 좀 뭐지 되고 양치지 오제지 제발 집어도 가리 상모 도다를 샤지 네사 저기 가라 저기지 상모 도다지 개치 모래 샤지 오 서서 능에 대화 저 탑지 상모 도 레좀 되고 올라 상모 땅서 근데 요디 가래도 되라 저기 소소데 능에 오는 산이 제로도 대는 저게 저 유모 받이 용도 도도 유모 방 문제 도도 유모 방 문제는 편지 참고용 것도 편지 참고용 우리 마트 변에 작하고 참이나 야 내좀 내 미시 몇이나 작하고 참데 미그 마토 첩제가 뭐도 야 가리는 가족만 용제가도 내좀 비치 미 소소나 돼 오 미치가 마토는 첩제랑 세무 종나요 원래 뭐지 작하고 약고 제고 망에 약고 제고 피해 약고 맞지 마음껏 소소 가는 채용 라청 나송 차오지 되네 상막이 좀 내지시지 기체 모래샤 대들이 소소한 게 준비를 미리 지다 대봐 아 라가 펜바다 이는 대봐 모래샤 다쭉 가면 무슨 레좀 내시죠 기체 모래샤 대화미 봐야 레샤 다다다 도자고 마땅고 가리나 레를 밥소는 것도 시골은 샤도고도 세골이 세도고도 레를 마을 것도 레 지금 맞으나 마술 치보는 소리 시금도 목이 치고는 목이 쉬어버도 밑에 그 탈도도 미 소소 레도 오리차 대대미 눈들이 지치고接서 내가 그 주로는 인다라고 이 대고도 다 먹는 좀 되다 마다리 도저히 내도 라왕 요 말이 랑그라왕 마토면 생구라왕 도가들이 되다가 동이 다니 시바다 동이 옷 따따 동이 옷 봐 내비죠 상로 동이 지와데 더보자 봐 대주바가 더보자 봐 대핀바 하장 침모도
And so during this time in prison, actually, it was not only my own experience, but there were a lot of people there in prison. And so that is a very significant example. So during this time in prison, there were about 400 people in our division, and there were two parts. There were those who were practicing religion and those who were not. And so those who were practicing any religion, it was either like Islam or Christianity or Buddhists and so on, they all were put together in one division, in one category. And then the rest were also put together into a different section, the non-religious people. And so those people without any religion, without any spirituality, they had a great deal of more suffering. They were fighting all the time. Many of them committed suicide. They suffered all the time. They had experienced so much hardships. And then on the other hand, our religious division, we actually, we didn't have food to eat. We had the same circumstance, but our experience was very different. For example, on Sundays, on our off days, we were having fun together. We were laughing and joking. And even often the prison guards would come and say, what are you doing here? Why are you having so much fun? You're having too much fun. This is a prison. Don't you know where you are? You're not supposed to be so happy here. So what are you laughing about? Have you forgotten that this is a prison? So I was really thinking at that time, it is really quite amazing what a big difference it is, when actually on the outer level there is no difference. It is just a different way of thinking, because our food was the same, our like living place, our cells was all the same, but then the way we viewed the world was very different. And so I saw that understanding karma, understanding the qualities of karma, it really is a method to transform suffering into happiness. Based on that, I was able to tolerate my own suffering and also recognize the causes of this suffering, my own afflictions, and thereby eliminate the causes of suffering for the future. So that helped me to recognize that. And also, for example, now in a country, we have laws in a country, and there are persons who recognize the workings of those laws and follow them, and then there's others who do not. And those who do not always run into various difficulties. They do whatever they want, and they run into difficulties. It is like not knowing karma. And then whenever another person is not looking, they do not follow the law. And so another person will naturally follow the law of a country. The person who understands karma, the workings of karma, will naturally understand the virtue in following the laws of a country. For example, they know that this is good for the country, this is good for all the people in the country, and also for myself in the future. It protects me in the future. So only karma can help us also to protect ourselves, to make us follow the laws of a country, for example. So it really has benefited me a lot, and I really found that only trusting in karma is my own greatest benefit, and also it brings happiness to others. So even if you do not understand much Dharma, much of the religion, it is most important to understand karma, cause and effect. And karma is infallible. Karma ripens to anyone, whether one is a king of a country or a beggar. If one has the karma to be killed or to die, then it will happen. If one doesn't have the karma, for example, if one is in war zone like myself, or in the midst of famine, one will still not die if one doesn't have the karma. So karma is really what determines it all. And that is really my hard advice to my Dharma friends. So we call it karma, we can give it this name, but ultimately it is really that which leads to happiness and suffering naturally. And we have no control over it. When we create the causes, it will naturally lead to happiness and suffering. That's just the workings of things, the nature of things. And so therefore, understanding karma, we really see the significance of creating the freedom or the independence of the mind. If you have that, you are able to tolerate outer difficulties, and you are able to avoid more of those causes for difficulties in the future. And you will recognize that the way to do that is to cultivate love and to protect love with a mind of patience. So only understanding karma really has benefited me greatly.
平时내가 대자고 대자고 가리 뭐 삼제리 조피지 제와로 뭐 다른 가지 집어도 가리래 오피지 삼제 요리 삼제 요리 저당 준비라서 뭐 돌아오나 고소하게 가다 유대게 요리 오 삼제 요리 이제 다 삼제 조고 그래 삼제 조로 가려서 그래 당고랑 물론 못해 파마 같은 집어리 돌아서 뭐 돌이 용띠 삼제 제 삼제 조고 요래 야, 들이 용띠 기기는 뛰는 삽질 들어오고 그래. 기기는 삽질 용띠 말로라. 그래서이 맨 도람 도타고 차대요. 용띠 기기는 삽질 가는 게 뭐래. 잠을 그 체력 다 줄 올라서 봐. 개바 삽질 삽질 가는 게 뭐래. 잠을 용띠 됐다고 이제 도르지. 기기는 삽질 가는 게 진짜 삽질 삽질이나. 그게 참말지. 서봐 약합라들. 약합지 받으면 문이 장에 매일 쫓아고요 말이야. 고복이 요보세 우리 담제 띵어 도트리 동입 삼점 잡은 용구요리 다 장완 종왕가이도 같이 뭐 속적으로 저기 좀 덮고요 말이 약합 됐다고 가려서 지는 약합이 다 같이 모르 약합 삼점 약합을 내지 탐지라 약합을 탐지라 삼점제 거래 삼점제 소속 덮고 서봐 삼점까지 있는 서봐 야채 체로요래 나디 같이 있는 시대 노도차 랑두고면 삼부터가 작을 찔찔 삼대 용기는 오서봐 자체로 도도 서봐 자체로 소들이라고 강에 체드세서 봐 서도 구양 못 잡고요래 동해라 매직바 대서들이 뭐로 차이고 사축 선바 상들 나디의 파장 이병으로 설레버더니 서봐 자체 못 잡고요래 별초는 처음 좋아하는지 들거기 지다요 말이 이제 거기 대독적으로 오는 더고요래 약합도 가든 하다 여도 상거리 롤랑과를 띠 그러다가 나타 동에 원포 강이 가리는 치기도 작하고 좋고요래 세기 세서만으로 세서만 삼로도 삼대 쪽거래 삼대 시장 도고 말이 그 신은 삼대도 그리고 오도서 제일 좀 레시바서 진짜 개쳐 보여래 그랬더니 대답을 소주동에 대해서 다들 동에 체도세에서 받아 마음과 동에 내가 그 하고 들어가 소속은 명다들 다든지 들어오나 봐.
And so all the outer suffering in this world is created by hatred. So first we need to identify that it is created by this mind of anger or hatred. And then next we should look at where actually is that hatred now. Actually it is within our own mind. There is anger or hatred within our own mind. We are angry at our friends and so on. So that is actually our true enemy. And that is the enemy that all beings in samsara have. All beings have hatred. And in the end, there's only one such a thing called hatred. All the hatreds are the same. There's only one essence, one nature of hatred. It all is the same. And so recognizing that, we can let go of it. We can recognize our own hatred and avoid acting out with this mind of hatred. Then next we recognize that the causes of happiness is a mind of love. This is, for example, we can see even in this life, this is what creates all happiness between friends. Two friends who love each other are very happy. That is because there is love. For example, if you love your pet, like your cat or your dog, then they want to stay next to you because they feel your love. And so love is something that we need to develop. We need to cultivate it or increase it. And so how can we do that? First of all, we do that by remembering the kindness of our parents who have given us this precious human body. And also by remembering the good qualities of all our companions. When we think of the qualities, the kindness of others, then love increases, we develop love. Then next we should also remember the kindness of our teachers from whom we have learned everything in this life. If we would not have these teachers, then we might look like humans, but our conduct is more like an animal. So whether it is a scientific teacher, a worldly teacher, or a religious teacher, all the teachers who have taught us anything are really very kind to us. So when you think about their kindness, then again love increases. And then next you should also develop love by remembering the kindness of your country. Because if you would not have this country, the people would have no foundation, no place to make a living. Then the stronger would kill the weaker, the people would kill each other, nobody would be protected from the elements, the cold and the heat and so on. So the country really is very kind to us and very important to us. And then we should have love for all the countries that protect their people. So this is the way we cultivate love, and the more love arises, as love increases, the mind becomes more and more vast. It opens up more and more and becomes vast. And contrary, the more and more you cling to the self, the more selfish we are, the more we narrow down, the more narrow the mind becomes. So think about the qualities of love. The quality of love is that whenever love arises, the mind opens up. You become very open and spacious. And when the mind is very open and spacious, you will not be afraid of any difficulties. You will be able to deal with any difficulty. You will be able to be open and loving to anyone. And so that is the hero-like quality of a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is someone who always sustains a mind of altruism, of love, and who has purified all selfishness. So that mind is like free-flowing water when the ice block has melted. Then there is no more suffering. Then one can deal with any circumstance on the outer level, happiness or a difficulty. So it is important to bring to mind the kindness of all those beings, especially in this country. The country who protects us in this lifetime from illness, from poverty, from many different things. And then in the future lifetime, after our death, the only thing that will protect us is our own love. So when we die, we must bring with us a mind of love. So understanding karma is really most important. If you understand karma, you will be able to tolerate your difficulties right now, and also you will recognize its causes for the future. So you will be able to develop those causes of happiness in the future. So this is my own personal experience that I wanted to share with you, my Dharma friends. And so then I pray that all of you, my friends, will be healthy in your bodies and happy in your minds.
Thank you, Rinpoche. You had a very great teaching, and we are so lucky to have you here. And thanks everyone come to this evening. And I wish Rinpoche's talk is help everybody, so benefits for everybody. We wish everybody is happy and the world is peace. Okay.